Hello and welcome to another episode of Deep Learning, the PolyAI podcast. I obviously did such a good job as a guest that I've now been invited to guest host this session. I'm Stephen Fine, Senior Business Value Analyst at PolyAI. And with me, as usual, I got Nikola Mrkšić. I probably botched the enunciation, which is embarrassing in front of my CEO, but there we go.
Such is life. Good to have you in that seat.
Yeah. And I reckon this is probably the only podcast that has a Serbian and a South African both working at PolyAI. And that doesn't take a lot because there's only two of us. Well,
We can find a few more. We'll do one or more next time.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about this episode. So today we will be touching on the report, The State of AI by McKinsey, and a lot of what they're talking about and what they're saying is the state of AI. Yeah, no, nothing gets me going quite like analysis from McKinsey.
When you joined PolyAI, did you think that in the cards is a podcast where you talk about McKinsey reports?
No, and I never thought I'd make it onto a podcast. This is like something I'm going to tell my parents about. I'm actually going to make my mom watch it. She's going to be so proud of me.
Well, that's what it takes to start Proctor.
Okay, so to kick it off for today, I think there's a really interesting insight at the top of the report, and I think it speaks a lot what's out there. They stated that 65% of respondents within the survey say that their organizations are using generative AI regularly. Now, that's nearly twice as much as was reported last year, which is a pretty hefty bump. And I guess my question to you is, does this figure surprise you?
I mean, like, what does using Gen AI mean, right? I think it's not surprising that people are falling over themselves to report that they're adopting new technologies. And, I think quite a few times I've kind of thought of Gen AI as the new cloud. And I think big organizations are really kind of following the same pattern where quite a few companies failed to do cloud transformation early enough and then suffered from having their competitors become more agile, have lower, hosting costs, and just being able to use newer technology. So I think people are doing their best to push the adoption of these things. I think in the previous episode we talked about just how are individuals at those companies using it. I think there are a lot of people who are power users of generative AI, but by no means do I think that 70% of the people in those companies are making good use. What do you think?
I think I reckon half the people don't even know whether they're using generative or not. I think I was at a conference last week and basically every single company had slapped on generative AI to what they're doing, whether they're actually doing generative AI or not. So I think there's definitely an uptick in AI and a lot more interest, but I can't get behind 70% of people are saying that they're using it in their day to day.
Yeah. I think that's a bit of that's a bit aggressive, right? But I think it might be it might be impactful to 70% of the people, although even that seems a bit rich, right?
Maybe it's just 70% of people are using ChatGPT to write nice emails to their boss.
That's something, right? I don't know. I think maybe we're just too skeptical. I think to those companies that use Microsoft Office at large, if it's properly enabled and it works, I think people might be using Copilot and similar things. So if that fits the bill, then it should fit the bill. And if the adoption is really that impressive, then I think, hell, who knows?
Well, let's assume that this adoption is true. What do you think is stopping it from not being even higher? What's stopping more people from adopting this kind of technology?
Time. I think ease of access, whether it's well integrated in the workflow. People don't change workflows all that much, right? We all tend to do relatively repetitive things, right? As a friend of mine likes to say, what do you do at work? You open your computer, what do you do, right? And chances are, you kind of do the same thing every day, and then you go from there. So I think it's just the tools you use, right? It's in your inbox, if it's in your PowerPoint, Excel, etc. That covers a lot of people's workflows. So Now that I think about it, it could be 70%. I'm just skeptical that all these orgs have rolled it out and enabled people at scale that fast because, we do a lot of this and we don't see such fast adoption.
Yeah. I mean, I think you make a good point with the Microsoft. Like, if it's integrated in with what you're doing, it becomes super, super easy and accessible to do it.
Yeah.
The barrier to actually doing the stuff doesn't is not a limiting factor anymore. So here's an interesting one that I actually think is a very good call out, and I know from the sales side we've seen a lot of is one of the things they spoke about is that with all this generative stuff and all the hype, it's put a much and a broader focus on AI capabilities as a whole, not just generative. So I know that they said that adoption like around AI is hovered around 50% at organizations, and now this is suddenly bumped up to 72%. So I guess it's this idea that there's all this hype around generative, but then it also opens up this opportunity towards just general AI. Do you see this? Do you see this playing out in in a business context that like the hype of generative is playing out in other facets of AI?
Absolutely. I think that, um, we've seen that with our buyers, where the moment kind of think like late late 22, kind of like through 23, like the interest in AI in general, before people could really tell you what generative means, and like genuinely, like how many people can tell you what generative actually means, right? Like from what is a generative model versus
Not a lot.
well, I mean, I'm just speaking, we're talking about like an LLM or, like Gmail's had, kind of like predictive sentence completion for a while, right? Like, where does a language model stop and an LLM begin, right? So I think from that perspective, like, the one thing that really helped was just the prominence of ChatGPT as a tool, the capabilities that really, became in a consumer form very easily accessible to a lot of people. What that meant then is that through that hype and as the AI bandwagon, I believe I'm saying AI bandwagon,
Yeah.
but truly, like, I think a lot of companies then just said, like, okay, like, what I often say to people is like, hey, in 50 years, I think you believe that we'll have Jarvis like voice assistants, right? So then the real question then becomes like, as you see an acceleration of progress in AI, does it become 5 years or 10 or two, right? And I think because so many people got exposed and got encouraged by senior leadership in these companies to really make a bet on AI, it meant that they just started looking at all sorts of AI products, right? Now, the really good thing is that I think a lot of AI companies are making heavy use of generative models because they're so incredibly good. Um, and through that, I think general adoption of AI-driven products is rising. I think that people, much like they learned how to use search engines, are also learning how to use generative models in their work, right? That it's more than anything best used as an assistive tool. I think, our use case is a rare one where we actually really don't use it as an assistive tool, but rather we provide a full kind of like end-to-end solution. But I think that's a bit of a harder Olympic discipline than using it to help you in your work, because then you can still check whether what you think it did makes sense or not.
Yeah. And I always kind of look at this as in the last year, it's a shift from like a push from the bottom, like the bottom of orgs that are like, we've got these cool solutions that we've got to push up. Suddenly you've got like executive leadership who are pushing down this agenda of AI. And if execs have it, it means that there's budget in there. And when there's like a year budget cycle that, a year ago it pushed in, now we're a year later, so budgets started to be allocated, and now there's a huge uptick in spending in that. At the same time, as well, I think from the broader AI perspective, is I think a lot of the companies that are, like you've said, are already in the workflows, like you're already using their solutions, is they've now integrated AI into their products, not always generative, which then fundamentally means as that happens, more people are essentially jumping on the AI bandwagon. And I guess this is it's an interesting kind of follow on from that is you're looking at like products. One of the things that McKinsey spoke about was people leaning to off the shelf products, so not building these things like these AI products themselves. So I guess I'll go on like why do you think this is the case? Like the old build buy versus buy debate, and the pros. And I want to see. Like obviously we're a buy, we're not a build. So like, what's the pro of building yourself, and then what's the pro of buying off the shelf?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, when you just look at conversational AI, we've always found that certain buyers are more prone to kind of like just embarking upon building up a team and trying to build it on their own. Um, and what was interesting always with voice assistants, with chatbots, is it's a lot of fun to build these things, right? If you can, I think that any tech team, given a choice between building an ERP system or a voice assistant, if it's really all the same, then most people would prefer to build something that they can pull out a phone in a pub and show their friends what they've been building, right? Now, when it comes to LLMs and a lot of these models, we're talking about extreme investments, right? You can burn a few million like it's nothing. And I think there are plenty of companies, especially in kind of like the highly regulated environments, which are cash heavy, think like very large banks, etc. I think there are LLMs being at least fine-tuned, it's not trained from scratch, right? But that's an expensive sport, right? That stops being. I think it's harder for, and I think like there's enough is understood when you look at just how foundational companies, they're raising hundreds of millions to even be in the game, and you already see consolidation, right? And quite a few of them falling off, recently, like Stability and Blockchain, etc. So you look at all that and you're like, hey, well, maybe I can't spend a few hundred million on this, no matter that I would like to do it, right? Um, so I think it's a bit harder to do in this case. Also, like the skill sets, the knowledge, and just the confidence of doing it. You'd have to be pretty confident that you can do something and that it makes sense. And to present an ROI on, a team of 10 doing something, it will matter that that team doesn't finish what you intended in 3 months, and that it becomes a team of 100 building something for a very long time, building extra competencies, not delivering. Like that would be the case typically, say, when it comes to building a voice assistant, right? We know plenty of clients that tried. Some of them came back. Others, I hope they will, right? But when it comes to an LLM, I think it's a pretty nuclear investment. So it's pretty hard for them to kind of like go and say, hey, I'm going to like take all our data and do this. Having said that, I think that a lot of large orgs are getting approached by foundational companies, cloud providers, etc., to talk about licensing their data and being part almost like of a federated learning group where they contribute a lot of data but get preferred terms in terms of usage, access, SLAs to these models. So I think it's kind of like falling in place where it should be. I think probably about 6 months ago, I'd heard a few banking CIOs tell me that they're definitely going to train their LLM. I think it's subsided a bit, and I think that's a good thing. It's a rational thing. So I think it just makes sense that it would be a build thing because it's not an easy thing to build. It's an expensive one, right? The space race is not really for Serbia or even South Africa to pursue, right? It's for the big boys.
Well, it's like the whole GDP of South Africa. So, and I guess it's like the idea of training these models with the big boys. I know that like Microsoft launched or tried delayed their launch of their like retail recall product where it's just taking screenshots of your screen the whole time. And now with OpenAI and Apple, they literally could have all the data in the world to train these models, which will be pretty hard to beat. So I guess like risk, if we still keeping the business context and of risk, like inaccuracy of these models, and I know that McKinsey kind of called that out, inaccuracy of the outputs that these generative models are producing as being the major risk. Is this a valid any path to us actually ever solving this? And how should companies be thinking about this?
Well, I mean, I think it is absolutely a risk. I think there's nothing exaggerated about it. Um, I think like the difficulty mostly at the moment with the current paradigm is in like how are you feeding the models, right? And the complexity moves from building a system which carries specific information to specific inputs. It moves into like how are you doing RAG, right? Like how are you selecting the supporting data that the model then uses to inform the specific answer, right? And the truth is, like, as much as, interacting with ChatGPT is elegant, right? And you go back and forth. Once you start building a business application, a lot of the logic that is custom goes into how you do RAG, right? And also, like, do you have access to the right bits of information? Are you perhaps providing contradictory pieces of information, right? And as you build and scale up any complex system that uses an LLM to drive the whole application, as you should, it's a phenomenal tool, right? Um, it gets really hard to know why it might have produced an incorrect answer, right? What prompted it, what didn't. And then as you build safety layers that override behavior or control for it very, very strictly, and you will do that in a lot of enterprise settings, then, you will slowly kind of like chip away at the most expressive thing
Yeah.
that an LLM can do, which is, reason over all that data in perhaps some creative ways, right? So as you do all that, you've kind of like, bent the system into a different shape. And then you're making it perform an action that, you might have inadvertently completely like restructured an input that the customer provided into something else. And, it could just fall on its face and do nothing if you're over constrained, but it could also be very creatively confused or use information that is just perhaps correct locally wherever you pulled it from, but when put together makes for an answer that is like patently incorrect, right?
Yes.
And it would be quite difficult, I think like we do a lot of that, and attributing just the source of information clearly, well,
Yeah.
that's where deep learning gets you, right? Because uh, these models have always been incredibly good black boxes, and the trade-off between their maximum expressive power and the interpretability, like that remains like the main point of contention for using LLM.
And I mean, it's that explainability part that becomes really key, because you can also, if you're able to explain it, you can work backwards to solve kind of where it's gone wrong, and which is, I think, will be a huge kind of part of where this goes. But it also kind of, one of the things that keeps coming up is like, if foundationally, and I'll just speak to like voice assistants, like if you're using generative AI for this stuff, like you have to have a knowledge base that is correct. Like you can have all the great tech in the world, but if foundationally the knowledge base is horrible, it's really hard to get this technology to do exactly what you want it to do consistently. Which I do think is like a major challenge of this.
Well, I mean, and yeah, it gets boring, right? Like you're back to square one of like, have you done digital transformation around way, right? Like, do you have everything in the background? Is it all aligned? Do you have the right APIs? How do you use them? How do you call them, right? Where's the information pulled from? And that's it, right? So like, as much as we want to fast track a lot of it, like, it will be the bolder enterprises which can afford to make some mistakes. They'll probably see some more impressive outcomes, but they'll also see some risk, right? And
there was a great article by one of the partners at BCG, just like around like, can we make sure that we get this AI stuff right? And he wrote very much about like, you can't use technology and AI to fix a broken process. Like if processes are broken and if your knowledge bases are horrible, you can't use technology to fix that. So it's like this, like, there's like part of it is right workflows, and it's a little bit beyond technology. Like technology is not the solution to everything. If you don't have good foundations, it doesn't really matter what the technology is there to do.
yeah, I mean, look, I think that um, you know these transformation projects, starting from guys like BCG and McKinsey all the way into larger consultancies. I'm not trying to be a cynic and say that they have a lot of things to sell to work, but they do, right? Like
Well,
these guys,
they've got to say the stuff. They've got to sell. They're selling their services.
well, they are selling their services, but like I used to be a skeptic, right? And I thought that these were just really smart people who inserted themselves into these processes. But the more we work with large enterprises, the more we figured out that these guys are completely indispensable, right? All the way from like setting the strategy of doing these things to actually getting them done. And often they're really the carriers of continuity in those organizations, and they're able to kind of like, you know, put together a patchwork of technology. Some may be like, end of life. Some may be things that other partners don't know how to integrate with and do so. Yeah, you've got to figure out like all of those things so that you can then reliably feed them to a neural network that can do some of that logic. And look, you'll have to build less of the piping, right? But I think it may take a bit of time before we trust GPT-4 to write APIs and go into these systems. I think, it's also, let's be honest, it's hard to predict, right? Like, if we can create, an almost like, we would almost have to be conscious, if you see what I mean. If you could create a meta-level script that, throws around these databases, interacts, learns, figure out the shape and format of everything, and, kind of like cross-references things, validates. But yeah, like it could maybe, that's the pipe dream that people have. Like, GPT-7 will go in, look at your database, figure out that you don't need this part, it will encode this one and know whether it's right or wrong, and, ask you a few questions, delineate and be done. The truth is, there's a data entry job at the end of it, probably, which is still going to have to be done manually, right? And yeah, so you'll have to clean house to make sure that these things can run well. Because, if the cloud was put everything in one place, think of like what Snowflake does in all those companies, right? Creating data lakes and all that. It's you need that stuff to make use of big data, right? Now, when it comes to like a reasoning thing that can go on top of it, well, it's kind of like I don't know, think like a fifth generation bomber or fighter, taking off from a runway, right? I'm no expert in that, but I imagine that a very bad runway is probably worse for a very fast fighter plane than for a very old kind of like I don't know what the older planes were called, but I can imagine that greater speed requires greater precision and accuracy. So I think you'll have to do a lot of building before you can make maximal use of these things, and especially rely on it in an enterprise setting.
No, I mean, I think what the idea of where this could go in the future is incredibly exciting, and I think that's the whole promise of like these autonomous AI agents that people are talking about at the moment, and is a huge craze. So the last thing that McKinsey spoke about was that a lot of people and companies have reduced their worry about people like AI now taking jobs. Like that's not something that they're planning for. Do you think that they should be planning for AI to take jobs, or that they should just keep going as is?
Listen, I think AI will accelerate aspects of certain jobs, right? Like, and that will mean that you can do things more quickly. If your job is highly repetitive, then yeah, like I think you can do a part of your job and maybe impact the headcount. I don't think that's the main bit. Right? I think that we don't see a lot of our clients thinking that way. I think like demographic pyramids look the way they look in most of Western Europe, America, etc. Like people are struggling to fill jobs, right? And that's I think the theme for our generation. So I think we've got to just figure out how to like come up with extra resources more than fearing for AI. Will a moment come where maybe we see a flip and realize that you and I both have been completely replaced by technology? I don't know. Like I find that pretty hard to imagine, but if it does, we can pick up the old Mrkšić literature and see what we'll do with it. With all our free time, right?
Yeah, all our free time, we'll self-actualize. We'll self-actualize. It's happening.
Yeah, I think so. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, Nikola, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. So this was another episode of Deep Learning with PolyAI. Tune back in next week where you won't see my reasonably pretty face. You'll see Nikola, but you'll have Damien back. So we'll see you.
Damien will decide, but thank you for stepping in from today.
Bye.